think the real misunderstanding for folks is they think that's what I would do.
Yeah.
Oh, these people aren't getting promoted, so next cycle, we're going to only promote those people.
Welcome to this episode of Everything Communicates. I'm here with Michelle Brooks, who's the Chief People and Culture Officer at Security Compass. Michelle, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I wanted to have you on because there is something that I think is there's an opportunity here. Not only is communication absolutely an essential component of business, really of life, but it's also a critical component of people and culture and how we communicate from the point of application and getting people into the company, even before that, really, how we're communicating about the positions, about our company. Everything is critical, right? There's an element of the application process that is really drawing a lot of, I'll say, ire, right? For a lot of people, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of miscommunication, a lot of suspicion about these applications and the demographic data that goes along with it. So I thought it would be great if I brought in an expert, somebody, at the C level who has been in HR for how many years is it, Michelle?
I hate to admit, but 20 or more.
More than 20 years. Okay, very good. So you've got a lot of expertise in people and culture and HR and processes in DEI, and you understand the intent behind these different things, right? So what we're talking about here is these questions around how we identify ourselves, race, gender, abilities, etc. And even in the UK, they're taking it to the next level where they're asking questions about your previous family information, right? When you were 14 years old, did your family have this and that, and right, talking about your family economics when you were like 14 years old. And I think what's really critical and missing, so my company, we work on identifying gaps and frictions in communication, and there's tons of them. And when we talk about this and look at this is an area where there's a huge gap, right? So we've got something that is, I think, and I think you think, for the social good, right? It's for the betterment of society and our companies. But what's missing is really the understanding of what is this data used for and how does it actually achieve that? So this is what we're going to get into today. I want to bring some clarity to these questions, some clarity to this demographics data, and especially what is the intent behind any of these questions? Why do they exist, et cetera? So there's two examples of this that I've noticed on LinkedIn. So Guy Allen starts this conversation and he actually creates a poll. And his poll question is, how do you feel about job adverts requesting DEI/demographic data as part of the application? And we can see here that although 23% had a positive view on it that shows a commitment to DEI, we call it, the vast majority, what is that, 68%, had a negative view on it. Either they were suspicious or negative because there was just more forms to fill. I'm going to pull a couple of comments and I'm going to give you an opportunity to speak and to comment on it and to provide some information and education here. But there's a couple particular people who commented, and I want to bring this up because I think it's just really illustrative of the misinformation and the suspicion and the fear that exists out there. And I'm going to ask you to comment on it. So Tony Leverett commented, he says, Guy, it's irrelevant. The question is, can the individual carry out the role? Next, they'll be asking, do you have any tattoos? If so, where? And it's a bit tongue in cheek, but his concern is real. It's too intrusive. Why do they care about this? Martin says, and he quotes this actual question, if you went to school in 1980s, did you have free school meals? Which is a question he recently saw in an application. I love his response. He says, there was no option for, actually, I had me butties with a bag of Monster Munch. But he says, seriously, though, what do they think this kind of info, positively or negatively, will it discriminate those who tick yes? Fair question, right? And then lastly, Dex Hansen says, negative. Hire who is qualified. Any and all information about racial information should be completely scrubbed. So that's the setup. These are the kind of questions that are being asked out there. And this is just a sample of the kind of, fear and misinformation and gap in communication that exists, right? We put this stuff out there, but we didn't really provide any information about why we're asking these questions. So that's what this show is about. And I'm going to shut up and I'm going to give you an opportunity to talk about what is the intention here and what are your thoughts on this?
I want to start from a place of understanding that this is sensitive data. And I completely understand and appreciate why people are nervous to share it at all. And even if they believe that it's being used with good intent, it's still very deeply personal information and needs to be protected. And so when you're asked to enter it into a job application and maybe you're applying to 10 jobs in one day, you're just like, where is this data going?
Yeah.
The first thing.
Yes.
And then the second thing is, why do you need this and what are you doing with it? So what I'll share with you is sort of my experience as an HR professional who's been involved with how this data is used
Yeah, please.
in the candidate process. So the intention, at least the places I've worked and in the circles that I travel in my
Yep.
community, the reason why it's helpful for organizations to collect this data in the candidate process specifically
Right.
is not used to decide who to hire, who to advance, any of this type of information.
Right. Which is it's a valid fear. That's what a lot of people think, right?
Of course, and especially over the last few years where there has been a push, a very much needed push, to hire with more diversity. So it's of course understandable that folks are worried about this being coming into hiring decisions. Most often, and how I have used this data before, is not to necessarily have it involved in the hiring process at all, but in fact, to look back from a reporting standpoint, usually in aggregate, that says, okay, how many BIPOC folks are applying to this job? And why
Right.
is it so much less than Caucasian folks or women versus men?
Right.
And it allows us to really understand like what might be, why are we not getting diverse applicants into our process, for example. So
Yep.
maybe we have to really focus our top of funnel activities at driving our brand into different markets and demographics. So that is truly in the candidate process how it is intended to be used. For the
Right.
most part, that's all the uses I've ever heard.
Hmm.
But I do understand the hesitancy, and I do believe that there's not enough information about why we're requesting this data and how we're using it. We definitely all need to do better there, particularly when we're asking for such sensitive information.
At your company, at Security Compass, do you have these kind of questions? Do you have these demographic questions?
In our hiring process, yes, but they're completely optional.
Yep.
And there's lots of people who answer prefer not to answer, and that's
Right.
completely fine.
That's completely fine. Yeah. And I suppose there's two components to this. One is, have you noticed that gap with the lack of explanation about why this information is being collected?
Not necessarily in the candidate process, but we have seen this when we're collecting demographic data on our employees. So often we will ask for it in onboarding, and it's again for the very same reasons. We want to understand what the experiences are by race, gender, et cetera, and make sure that we are looking at systemically making sure that we have good processes, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, I might use this data as an HR professional in aggregate and look at our promotion rates for different demographics. And
Yep.
if I'm like noticing that BIPOC folks aren't getting promoted at the same rates, then that gives me an opportunity to go back, look at our promotion process, see if there's any bias, any systemic issues in there. So that's an example of how we use this data. But again,
Yeah.
it's all in aggregate.
Yeah.
And in order to do that, I need to collect that data from employees.
Right.
And when we first did this a number of years ago, we had to do a lot of communication, months and months and months of
Right.
why we need this data, what we are going
Okay.
to use it for,
Right.
who has access to it, and
Okay.
how we're going to protect it. And remember, we're a cybersecurity company.
Right. Yes. Right.
So you can imagine that our folks are more naturally skeptical.
Sure.
Right?
Yep.
They have a lot of exposure to what
Sure.
happens with this data if it gets out into the wilderness.
Yeah.
So we really had a big hurdle to overcome in terms of getting people comfortable. But when we were doing that, we did a huge push making it clear, and that was super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. Yeah, that's great. I understand that you had that communication. It sounds like ample communication with your folks for those various reasons. Do you see though, and maybe agree with the idea that it's generally not well communicated out there about why this information is collected and what's
For
how it's being
sure.
used?
Like I'll even say inside our hiring process, we probably aren't as clear as as we need to be when we are starting to collect this in the application
Yeah.
process. And I'll also add a firm yes to this, because when we first did the launch to get demographic data for our employees,
Mm.
we went so wild with this communication. But now it's just part of our standard onboarding process that you fill in this information, right? I'm not doing a big talk at town hall about it, etc.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
What is superbly interesting and not great is that our prefer not to answer has been creeping up.
Yeah.
And the only reason why we know is because we haven't done as good a job of communicating in the why.
Yeah.
Because we're not doing as a mass communication
Yeah.
project and initiative. It now needs to be embedded in our day to day. And so that's actually something we're looking at. How do we improve the communication of the why, what we're doing, and how we're protecting this data
Yeah.
in the onboarding process so that we can collect it?
Yeah.
Because it's so important to have this data.
Yeah.
We're doing things to check ourselves and make sure that we're treating people equitably. But without that data, I can't do those checks.
Yeah. And so that's, I mean, that's why I wanted to have this show, right? Like talk about this topic specifically, because I believe in the power of DEI. And I want to come back to that actually, because you brought that up in a couple of different ways that I want to come back to, which really is the important part of the conversation is why do we do this at all? But I believe in it. I believe in the power of DEI. And I'm interested in ways to create more diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this is a way to do that. Where I come from is in helping companies to fill these gaps. And so when I see these gaps that don't just exist at some companies, this is universal. There is a universal gap here. So that's why I thought, let me just bring in somebody who has some expertise in this. Let's have a conversation. Let's just put this back out online and have HR experts work with their teams to create a new standard where there is information about this, right? When these questions are being asked, there should be a little, question mark that you can click on and saying, why is this information being used? How is it being stored and protected? That's my view on it. But let's come to the why of it all, right? And you brought it up in a couple of different ways. One is, and I liked what you said, there's really a needed push for diversity. Let's talk about that. Why, in your perspective, is there a need for a push for diversity? Because a lot of people would say that's the problem right there. We don't need a push for diversity. And that's what, one of the decks said that, right? He said, hire who is qualified. Right? Any and all information about racial information should be completely scrubbed, right? So he doesn't like any of this data at all, right? So in your view, why should we have this, and why should we have the data? Why should we be pushing for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
So actually, I don't think we should be pushing for diversity. What I do think is that our systems are unintentionally rigged, and this is the countermeasure.
Okay, tell me more.
The scenarios we know, like the reality is, for example, I'm in the tech community. There are disproportionately low number of tech professionals, and there is a long-standing incorrect belief that these people aren't out in the market. The reality is they are, and they aren't getting through the hiring process because the process itself, from how applications are sourced, how ATSs work, of course, human unintentional bias, all of these things have these slight little things in them, mostly unintentional, that stack the process against them. And so when we say we need to do a diversity push, first of all, I actually don't want to look at race for candidates at all. But what I want to do is pull all those problems out of my process. And they're just sometimes hard to find. And so I actually think that the intention should be to make your processes more equitable and let whoever's in your process in and let the right person get the job. The challenge with that is if you don't collect this data, you actually don't know if your processes are rigged one way or the other. Okay. So, and I think there's also a concern that we're trying to push certain people who look away into the job
absolutely.
or out of the job. And that's actually not the case. We just want everyone to get a fair shot. But you have to start with the belief that everyone isn't getting a fair shot already. And that we have to find a way to fix the processes so that they're truly equitable And until then, we have to stock the process with more people from a certain demographic so that they get through. So I actually don't think this is the right approach, but it is the approach we need to do until we're sure all our processes are equitable.
Interesting. So you just said you don't think this is the right approach. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to look at that type of information. I don't even want to have to collect it. But if I don't collect it, I can't determine whether my processes are unintentionally biased. So
Mhm.
otherwise I'd be like, our processes are great.
Sure.
But then when I look at it and I'm like, oh gosh, like we haven't hired somebody from this particular community this year at all. But if I didn't collect that data, I wouldn't
You didn't
know.
even know that.
And then I can go back and dig and go, okay, so why? What's going on with our process or where we're putting ourselves as an employer
Yeah.
brand that is not drawing this crowd of folks. But if I don't
Mhm.
have that data, I can't ask myself those questions and
Yeah.
change the behaviors or processes inside my organization.
Yeah. But I still want to come back to why. Like, why would you want to? Like, why would you care? Like you say, oh, we didn't hire anybody from this demographic. Who cares? Like, why do you care that you didn't hire anybody from that demographic?
I think first of all, there's the belief, and I believe this wholeheartedly, that we need to have diversity of thought, voices, and perspectives. And you can't do that if your organization is set up with people from very similar backgrounds and lived experiences. And when you add people from all different socioeconomical
Yeah.
conditions, race, gender, etc., you get a more well-rounded company with more diverse
Yeah.
experiences. And that's really important for businesses to be successful. Second
Mm.
piece I'll say to that is that it's the right thing to do, right? Organizations, in my belief,
Mm.
should look like the populations they're in.
Mm.
So if
Right.
we're in Toronto, where I am,
Mhm.
then in our population, I think, I can't remember, don't quote me, I think it's 9% Black population, for example.
Mhm.
That's how my company should look,
Okay.
give or take,
Mhm.
right? And in that example, so if my company doesn't look like that,
Mhm.
why?
Right.
And so I just believe, like philosophically, that it's better for business.
Mhm.
It's better for people to be around people with diverse perspectives,
Mhm.
and that our companies should look like our communities.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I also live in Toronto, and our city motto is diversity, our strength.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think a lot of people, especially those, that's not just a Toronto thing. I think anybody who lives in a diverse city also believes that, right? New York City, extremely diverse. And I think they would also, like New Yorkers, I think would also say, most of them, some people are, have a proclivity to be racist and they hate that diversity. But I think most New Yorkers, just like most Torontonians, most people in San Francisco, most people in Vancouver, I think most people appreciate that diversity, appreciate various thoughts and perspectives and cultures and see that as a strength. So that's where I personally come from. I just love diversity, period. Right. I mean, I wouldn't want to go into an ice cream shop that just had 25 flavors of vanilla. Right. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
no, thank you. Right. I want to go into the 25, 50 options, of everything in tons that I've never thought before, flavor combinations that I've never thought of. Like that's what I want, right? I want to experience the world in all of its potential diversity. That excites me. I love that, right? And so that's just kind of me personally and us as a society in especially in cities. But thank you for bringing that back to business and why we should care about diversity in business.
I want to live in a world for which I am so confident that our systems and processes are equitable. And
Yeah.
so, therefore, everybody would have equal access and opportunity. And unfortunately, that's not reality. And
Yeah.
so we have to deal with the reality and find some way to counter these processes that aren't equitable.
Yeah.
There's only two ways to do that. One is to track this information and figure out where you're at,
Yeah.
and sort of stock the top of the funnel differently.
Yeah. Now, what would you say to people who don't want that equity necessarily? They have enjoyed a place of privilege due to their skin color, their socioeconomic status, and they don't like those questions saying, "What was your socioeconomic status when you were 14 years old?" They fear that that tick may actually work against them, right? If they if they weren't poor, if they didn't come from a poor family, or the opposite, right? Like they want to, nobody wants to have the cards stacked against them, right?
Mhm.
Yeah, everybody likes the idea of equity. I mean, maybe some people don't. They like the idea of privilege and they want to
Mhm.
maintain and secure their privilege, and they don't want equity for people who have been discriminated against. So, what would you say to those people?
Well, I think, those who are privileged, including myself, right? I've never necessarily had a conversation with somebody where they're like, I want to keep my privilege. Most often, people are unaware of how privileged they've been,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
So, for example, if you're in a family and you have a university student, this is a huge struggle going on in the market right now, and those kids aren't finding jobs,
Yep.
right? And so those of people who are in like positions like myself, like I didn't, but I could help my kids find jobs.
Yep.
And if I was in a different job category or industry, like I wouldn't have those particular connections. And so I think part of being privileged is obviously being blind to the fact that things have been easier for you in some regards, not all regards,
Right.
right? And so my experience with privilege is that most people aren't clinging to it intentionally.
Mhm.
Most of the time they don't understand that other people don't have those same
Right.
privileges.
And what would you say to those who are clinging to it? I mean, you gave another example I wanted to come back to was you talked about how if you are seeing in your company that certain people or groups of people are not getting promotions and you want to work to bring equity there to who's getting promoted. And then let's say some people just don't want that. I mean, there's a real push for that. This is a real thing, right? There's an anti-DEI, let's not elevate or promote people who don't deserve it. And that's what it's seen as, right?
Mhm.
So how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think first of all, the whole concept is misunderstood, right? Let's use my example. So I go and I do a promotion analysis and I realize, like, oh, we're disproportionately promoting people of a particular demographic over time, not just like as a one-time deal, right? We're looking at a pattern.
Yeah.
My answer to that is not to go promote people from that demographic next time.
Okay.
That's not the game, right?
Okay. Okay.
What it is, it says, ooh, my process is doing a little something and I need to go back and look at it.
Right.
Why might my process be favoring
Right.
or disadvantaging folks? And I'll share with you a tool that I have used in the past before, and it's super easy and lightweight. And it really helps you think from an equity lens. And it's called the equity sequence.
Hmm.
And it's by the folks at Title Equality. And it essentially trains you to ask yourself 5 questions when you're dealing with processes, policies, et cetera.
Okay.
And really, ultimately, it's like, who does this favor? Who does this disadvantage, et
Yeah. Yeah.
cetera. And so when I see that promotion disparity,
Yeah.
I don't go and promote the folks who look that way. What I do
Right.
is go, why does my process
Right.
favor? And I try and work out those particular kinks.
Right.
So I think the real misunderstanding for folks is they think that's what I would do. Oh,
Yeah.
these people aren't getting promoted. So next cycle, we're going to only promote those people.
Yeah.
And I have never heard of a company
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
And I spend a lot of time in the HR community, and I know that that is not how people are looking at this data
Yeah.
and how they are using it. But I do understand, because I, read these comments too,
Mhm.
and it's infuriating. So it's like, this isn't how we're using this data. This
Right.
isn't the intention.
Yeah.
The intention is to look inward and
Yeah.
figure out how do we take systemic bias out of our
Yeah.
processes, not necessarily to stack the deck one way or the other.
I think that phrase captures it, right? Not stacking the deck one way or the other. It's about equity.
Mhm.
Equity is about not stacking the deck. Actually, this is an interesting question, though, isn't it? Because if your organization is currently not equitable, if you see that clearly, it's not diverse and there's not equity in terms of promotion, et cetera, and with that, you have a desire for equity and diversity because you acknowledge and you want that diversity of opinion and experience and culture and all these kind of things, then it's like, How do you not work to stack the deck in that way? Do you know what I mean?
Mhm. So this is my belief on that topic, is that if your processes are, you've done all the work
Hmm.
to evaluate your processes and
Yeah.
figure out that they are as equitable as that you can do. And it's sort of like a multiple, you have to keep doing it and reviewing it over and over as you learn and do new things and tweak it, of course. But let's just to say you're starting from a belief that your processes are equitable. Then what it means is, if we're talking about from a hiring perspective, people should naturally come out of the bottom of the funnel in a diverse way, right? Like just naturally, that's how it should flow.
So long as you've got enough diverse candidates in the top of the funnel,
Yeah.
right?
So that's it. So first of all, your funnel has to actually work for all.
Throughout, all the way down. Yeah.
Most don't, right? Like
Most
most,
don't.
there's like a, people of a certain demographic start to pop out of the funnel
Yeah.
unintentionally. So you have to also make sure that going into the funnel is a diverse group of folks.
Right.
So for example, referral programs are a perfect example. So right or wrong, most of us in our network have people who look like us,
Sure.
right? And not necessarily only look like us, but are disproportionately people who look like us.
Sure.
And so referral process, for example. So if I'm a company that says 80% of our hiring comes from referrals,
Yeah.
I'm not starting from a place of diversity.
Right.
You're going to your top of funnel, even if your process is beautiful, your top of funnel is going to be the same people coming in. And so it's a perfect example of saying, hey, I'm not saying we shouldn't take referrals. I love referrals. But what we need to do is be aware that if we're pushing referrals and everybody at our organization looks the same, then the natural consequence is that that's what's going to happen. And so I might, for example, in that case, if I have an organization that we don't have enough diversity, I might not double down on my referral policy. I'd still have one, but I wouldn't make that my primary recruitment model. I would then, as an example, go out and build partnerships with community groups and make sure that my job postings were showing up at places where those folks are looking.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't mean that I'm going to force that, but I'm going to make it more intentional effort to bring those job postings into those communities. And what I'm going to do is hope that then I get a more diverse candidate pool. And then ultimately, if my processes are good, I'll end up with a diverse workforce.
Yeah.
I don't believe in a forcing function at the bottom of the funnel, saying like you have to interview 3 women for every process, or this hire needs to look like this. That is not my personal belief, and I don't know a lot of organizations that live that in principle. They really focus on the process and who's getting into the funnel. If you do both of those things well, then you're going to get a diverse workforce. But here's going back to our original point. If I don't collect that data,
right,
I don't even know.
You don't even
I don't know what my workforce is and if I have a problem.
Yeah. And coming back to another point, I think most people do want fairness, even if they don't necessarily want, well, nobody wants to be discriminated against, whether you are privileged or not. But I think most people want fairness. There are some people who don't want fairness. They like their privilege and they want their privilege. And these are what I would call these bad actors who are literally and actively anti-DI. They want to take somebody who was very qualified, a person, let's say of color or some, marginalized group, and remove them. This is what we've seen in the US at the highest levels, right? Removing highly qualified, highly experienced people of color and removing them, calling them a DEI hire, and putting in a white male, right? A highly less qualified white male, right? So there are some people at the highest levels who are actively desiring anti-DI white supremacy, I would call it. But I don't think that's not most people by far. And I think most people want, like you said, the cards not stacked against or for. They want fairness, right? And going back to what Dex said, somebody who is qualified, right? He says that any and all information should be completely scrubbed. However, as you pointed out, you can't necessarily create something that is fair and equitable and diverse if you're not collecting information, because, and this was the critical bit, right? Because our processes and our systems are geared towards bias and racism.
Yeah.
And white supremacy, I suppose.
Exactly. Because, once you accept that the processes are not equitable to start,
Yeah.
then, but if you don't have that as your belief,
Hmm.
then I understand why you wouldn't agree.
Yeah.
You have to really know that these processes are unintentionally rigged in this particular way. And we see that outside of everything HR, right? We see it in banking, who gets loans, home ownership, jail time, like all of the
All of
things.
it.
These
Yeah.
systems were rigged. And the other piece of it is that it's also about who is represented in leadership, right? Because if you just assume, which we have to, is that every human being has unconscious bias, we are naturally drawn to people who are more like us. So when you have folks of a particular demographic in leadership, it will also naturally mean that those biases show up. Even if you do everything you can, those biases will still show up. So this is why diversity and representation, particularly in leadership, is also very important, because it's an easier way to remove some of the bias out of the process.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, thank you so much. Hopefully this is helpful for listeners. Like I say, I think it's a big gap, huge gap in communication. And hopefully this is helpful for people who are questioning and suspicious and being purposefully misinformed about what's actually happening and the intention of it. So thank you so much for coming on and talking with me about this.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely.